Good morning and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Kato. EU member states, and that includes Belgium, have the common goal of ending the war in Ukraine. But the EU is adamant that the frozen Russian assets located in Belgium's Euroclear Bank are a key component as a loan for Kiev. On top of its continued skepticism, Belgium believes that using frozen Russian assets to finance Ukraine will jeopardize the peace negotiations. To tell us about the latest on these issues, we are joined by Hugo Dixon, commentator at large at Reuters. Good morning and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Mary.
So the idea of using the frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine has been on the table for quite some time, to say the least, but it just cannot come to fruition. And you have worked on presenting the idea in the form of a loan, but it isn't going down well either. And the Belgian Prime Minister, Bart De Wever, has made himself very clear. What do you think of the letter that he sent to EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen?
So I think that his argument that this loan, this reparations loan, which I came up with some colleagues a while ago, would endanger peace, is exactly the opposite of the case. The whole idea of this loan is actually to make it easier to get a reasonable peace deal. At the moment, Vladimir Putin thinks he is going to win this war because he thinks it's a war of attrition, and eventually Ukraine will run out of arms and money, and Ukraine's backers, such as America and Europe, will run out of any desire to actually fund Ukraine. We've already seen that America has dropped out of the picture in terms of providing money, and Vladimir Putin is counting on the same happening to Europe. Whereas if what you do is you provide a reparations loan, and what we're talking about is something of, say, 140 billion euros or more, if we include the assets that are not just in Euroclear, but elsewhere, both in Europe and outside Europe. But if you make such a big loan to Ukraine, which Ukraine only has to repay if Russia pays it reparations, then that will start to change the calculation, because Vladimir Putin will know that Ukraine isn't going to just run out of money, that it is well funded for a war to last several years, and so that he, Russia, cannot win this war the easy way just because it runs out of cash. And then he'll be more willing to come to the negotiating table with reasonable demands rather than just demanding that Ukraine capitulates.
OK, but Belgian Prime Minister Bart De Wever puts forward some crucial points. The proposal violates international law and would instigate uncertainty and fear in financial markets, damaging the euro. These risks are unfortunately not academic, but real. So these factors sound like they're serious and far-reaching, and not taking them into consideration would be reckless. Can you chime in on that?
Yes, it's just not true. This loan does not violate international law. It is Russia that has violated international law, first by invading Ukraine and then by causing what's thought to be roughly $600 billion of damages. And under international law, it is absolutely clear that if you illegally invade another country and destroy it, you are liable to pay reparations. So this is not against international law. As for the euro, the biggest risk to the euro is if Ukraine capitulates and becomes essentially a vassal state of Russia, and Vladimir Putin recoups his frozen assets and reinvests them in boosting his army. Then it will be Europe, which is the European Union, actually, which is under threat. And it's quite possible that at the next point, what Putin will do is he'll turn his attention perhaps to the Baltic states, something, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. And if he succeeds then, that will be a massive risk to the euro. These are Eurozone states, after all. They use the euro. And then the impact, I'm not even sure that the euro would survive that. So those people who say, like Bart De Wever, the Belgian Prime Minister, that making a loan, a perfectly legal loan to Ukraine, would damage the euro are missing the really big threat, which is a capitulation deal by Ukraine could be the death knell of the euro.
But a lot of commentators say that one of the missing pieces in this is the lack of a basic court order. And my question to you is it not just possible to get a court order to release these assets? If that is all that is needed to release these assets, why can't we get a court order?
Well, under international law, as I said, it's clear that Russia has to pay reparations. The UN General Assembly passed a resolution calling for Russia to pay reparations and also calling for an international tribunal to be established to adjudicate on the exact size of the reparations and who should be paid. That process is underway, and an international claims commission for Ukraine, the draft treaty has already been agreed. It's going to be signed off in December, but inevitably it will take several years to reach its conclusion. And Ukraine needs money now. We can't wait for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, however long it will be, for that tribunal to reach its conclusion. That's why we came up with this idea of a loan to bridge the gap between when the International Claims Commission has finished its job and now when Ukraine needs the money. But this is not a confiscation of Russian assets. This is a much more sophisticated scheme. It's a loan. And if at the end of the day, the International Tribunal concludes that actually this wasn't an invasion, they might say, oh, it was only a special operation to get Nazis, which is what Vladimir Putin says. Or they might say there's not been any damage, it's all just fake news. But frankly, those are mythical scenarios. But we still have to wait several years. And that's why it's important to make the loan today. And that is what the European Union is hopefully going to do. You say there isn't support for it. There's a lot of support for this idea. It's just principally, I mean, there may be some others, but it's principally Belgium that has to be convinced.
But in light of everything that you have shared, and obviously the EU supports rule of law, so obviously abiding by court rulings would be very, very important. Why is it not possible to fast track this issue and actually just get a court order simply for the purpose of releasing these assets, keeping in mind that Ukraine desperately needs money?
I don't think you need a court order. What you need is a decision by the European Union to instruct Euroclear to pass the cash associated with the Russian assets to Ukraine via one or more of the mechanisms that we've been discussing, but they would all be reparations loans. And for that to happen, you need agreement of the member states. And that's what they're working on. At the moment, you've got a lot of them that want to do this. And then what we need to do is we need to find a way of persuading Belgium to come on side. And Belgium does have some legitimate concerns because it is worried that even if the arguments are strong, that there might be some way in which Russia might get the assets unfrozen. For example, under the US peace plan of 10 days ago, that Donald Trump and his advisor Stephen Witkoff came up with in cahoots with the Russian assets would have been unfrozen. Now, in that situation, under the European Commission's plan, the European Union would have had to reimburse Euroclear, this Belgian depository. And so Belgium is understandably saying, well, if you've already lent the money to Ukraine, where are you going to get the cash from? Can you provide us some sort of guarantee? And the European Commission is saying, yes, we are going to provide some guarantee. And so that is a reasonable point for the Belgians to say, well, yes, we want to see the detail of the guarantee and we want to see if it's sufficient. But coming up with these spurious arguments that a loan to Ukraine will endanger peace efforts is absolutely wrong. The only peace that Vladimir Putin will accept today is one where Ukraine effectively capitulates. And that will be terrible for Ukraine, but also terrible for Europe. And Belgium should really understand that. By contrast, a reparations loan would give Vladimir Putin an incentive to agree to a more decent peace, a lasting peace, not a fully just peace, but something that we can live with. And one of the important things to know about this loan is it would be provided in tranches. It's not as though the whole amount would go to Ukraine in one go. It would come maybe every 6 months. There would be 30 billion or something that would go to 30 billion euros or something like that, that would go to Ukraine. And it could be linked to progress on a ceasefire. So what could happen is that if Vladimir Putin stops the invasion and agrees to a ceasefire, then Europe would stop making loans. If, though, he broke the ceasefire, they could start making them again. And that way, you make absolutely clear to the Kremlin that the longer that they continue fighting, the more of their money will end up with Ukraine, with their enemy. And that is a very powerful leverage to get Putin to agree a decent peace deal. So while Bart de Wever, the Belgian Prime Minister, has some legitimate concerns that Belgium should be protected, he is completely and utterly wrong to say that this will endanger a peace deal. A reparations loan is designed to help get us to peace.
So what is the way forward? Because the Belgians are concerned about the liabilities should the assets be released. What are those liabilities? What is Bart de Wever most concerned about? And what can the EU do to meet the Belgian concerns?
Well, the main Belgian concern is that once the cash has gone from Belgium to Ukraine, if at any point Russia is able to demand its money back, it needs to be sure that there's money there to repay Russia. So that's the concern. And the way forward, it seems to me, there are two ways forward. The main one, which is what the European Commission is pursuing, is that there will be guarantees. And the issue, therefore, is to actually clarify the detail of the guarantees and whether they can agree on that. So that's the main track that's being pursued. Belgium wants fully fledged guarantees. Europe is saying, we'll give you guarantees, but what is the detail, the Belgians are saying, and can they agree on that? The second possible track, which is something that our group has proposed, is that you could move the Russian account, the entire Russian account, the assets and the liabilities, just take it away from Belgium and put it somewhere else. And we think that that would help deal with the situation if the European Commission is not able to convince Belgium of its current plan for dealing with the Russian assets. So we're saying you need a plan B, and we've got a good plan B. Either your plan works with Belgium or just take the entire account away from Belgium and put it in a new vehicle somewhere else.
But if it's so important to cover Ukraine's financial needs, and obviously it is, why can't the EU states just go along with de Wever's suggestion of the EU commissioning a 45 billion joint debt to cover the needs for 2026? And obviously it's taxpayers' money and there are all sorts of opinions regarding that. But he has put forward a suggestion for the immediate coming year.
Well, there are two things. First of all, it's important to make Russia pay. Russia started this war and Russia's caused a lot of damage. And it's not easy to explain to European taxpayers that they should pay money when there is Russian money that can be used instead or as well. The second thing is that what Europe has been doing, and America over the last 3.5 years, is they've been providing drips of cash to Ukraine. And that hasn't been enough. They've been lurching from one crisis to another. The whole idea of the reparations loan is to provide a huge chunk of money, albeit in tranches, but to say there's such a vast sum of money there that starts to change the calculation of Vladimir Putin, that he cannot win a war of attrition. Whereas if you take the Belgian idea and just give another drip, but in the Kremlin, they'll think, well, okay, they've got a little drip now, but in 6 months they'll run out of money, or in a year they'll run out of money. What we
Hugo,
need is a
I'm going to have to
game
interrupt
changer.
you.
And this reparations loan is a game changer.
I'd love to carry on. It's great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us again, and I hope we'll have you back on TVP World as this issue develops. Thank you so much. Have a good day. And that's a wrap for World Talks. Thank you so much for joining us, and make sure that you keep yourselves updated with TVP World. Goodbye.